They say the most dangerous men are the ones who can smile while destroying you. But Jaekyung Severin Bey never smiled, not until the day he discovered he had a son. 3 years ago, Zawadi Nyambura Weeksa vanished from Seoul without a trace, taking with her secrets that would reshape an empire. Now she's returned, and walking beside her is a 3-year-old boy with eyes that mirror the coldest strategist in Korea's underworld. In a single glance across a conference room, everything changes. Because blood doesn't ask permission. Legacy doesn't wait for readiness. And sometimes the most ruthless man alive has to choose between the power he's built and the child he never knew he wanted to protect. This is the story of what happens when control meets consequence, when violence faces innocence, and when a man who sees everything finally looks in the mirror. Stay until the end to witness a transformation that will leave you breathless. Like, comment, and subscribe, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about power and redemption. The Inheritance of Blue. The man bleeding onto the warehouse floor had made 3 mistakes in his life, and Jaekyung Severin Bey was about to remind him of all of them. The data breach, Jaekyung said, his voice carrying the temperature of winter steel. 3 years ago, June 14th. You have 30 seconds to tell me who authorized the access. The man's mouth trembled. Blood trickled from his split lip, but it was Jaekyung's eyes that made him shake, those pale, crystalline blue eyes that seemed to strip away every lie before it could form. People said looking into them was like being seen by something not quite human. I swear I don't know anything about. Jaekyung raised one finger. His associate, Min Seo, stepped forward with a tablet, turning the screen toward the bleeding man. Bank transfers. Encrypted messages. Timestamps that lined up perfectly with the security breach that had nearly cost Jaekyung everything 3 years ago. The architectural firm, Jaekyung continued, his tone unchanged. Seoul Heritage Restoration Partners. You routed the breach through their systems. Clever. Made it look like their project manager had gotten careless with access credentials. He tilted his head slightly. What was her name again? Min Seo consulted the tablet. Zawadi Nyambura Weeksa. Kenyan national. She was managing the Gyeongbokgung Palace documentation project. Something flickered across Jaekyung's face, so brief that only someone who knew him well would have caught it. Min Seo caught it. The bleeding man was too terrified to notice. Zawadi. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. She left Seoul, Min Seo continued, scrolling through the file. Abruptly, 2 months after the breach. Returned to Nairobi. No contact since. The firm assumed she'd been compromised or complicit, but nothing was ever proven. Because nothing needed to be proven, the bleeding man gasped, desperate now. She was the perfect scapegoat. Foreigner. Temporary contract. By the time anyone looked closely, she'd be gone. That was the whole point. Whose point? Jaekyung asked softly. The man's eyes darted to the door, calculating escape possibilities that didn't exist. Jaekyung waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting. Choi, the man finally whispered. Director Choi Sun-woo. He wanted to weaken your position before the merger. Needed you distracted, vulnerable. He knew you'd spend resources hunting for the leak instead of consolidating power. The name landed like a stone in still water. Choi Sun-woo. One of his own advisors. A man who'd sat across from him at strategy meetings for 5 years. Jaekyung stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket with movements so precise they could have been choreographed. Min Seo. Verify everything he just said. If it's accurate, arrange his medical care and relocation. If he lied, you know what to do. He walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Sir, Min Seo called after him. What about the woman? Zawadi Weeksa. Should we locate her? Clear her name in the records. Jaekyung paused, his hand on the door. For just a moment, memory surged sharp and unwelcome. 6 months of her presence in his life. The way she'd looked at him like he was a man instead of a monster. The morning he'd woken up to find her gone, her apartment emptied, her phone disconnected. He'd told himself it confirmed what he'd always known. Everyone leaves eventually. Everyone betrays eventually. Now it seemed she'd simply been collateral damage in someone else's game. Find out where she is, he said quietly. But don't contact her. Just monitor. I want to know if she's in danger because of this. Understood. Jae-kyung stepped out into Seoul's neon-soaked night, and for the first time in 3 years, he let himself wonder what Zawadi Nyambura Weeksa had been running from. 4 days later, Min Seo delivered a file that changed everything. "She's here," Min Seo said, sliding the folder across Jae-kyung's desk. "In Seoul. Has been for 2 weeks. UNESCO Heritage Restoration Contract. She's working with the same firm, Seoul Heritage Restoration Partners. They brought her back as a consultant for the Changdeokgung Palace Preservation Project." Jae-kyung's fingers stilled on his pen. "Here." "Yes, sir. Temporary housing in Itaewon. The contract runs another 6 weeks." He opened the folder. Recent surveillance photos showed Zawadi entering and leaving the firm's offices, her posture as upright and purposeful as he remembered. She looked older, not worn, but sharpened, somehow. More defined. Then he turned the page and his entire world tilted. The photograph showed Zawadi walking down a Seoul street, her hand holding the hand of a small boy. Maybe 3 years old. Brown skin, tight coils of dark hair catching the sunlight. And eyes. Bright, piercing, impossible blue eyes. Jae-kyung stopped breathing. "Sir?" Min Seo's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sir, I should mention, the child has been with her at the office several times. The firm's receptionist mentioned he's scheduled to return to Nairobi with his grandmother next week, but he's been in Seoul for the past month while Ms. Weeksa establishes her project timeline." Jae-kyung couldn't stop staring at those eyes. They were identical. Not similar. Identical. The same crystalline blue that made people uncomfortable, the same shade that marked him as visibly different from every other Korean man in the country. What's his name? Amari Seojun Bae. 3 years old. Birth certificate lists Zawadi as the mother. Father is listed as unknown. Bae. She'd given him the surname. His surname. Jae-kyung's mind was calculating with the cold precision that had built his empire. 3 years old. Zawadi had left Seoul 3 years and 2 months ago. The timeline aligned perfectly. "Arrange a meeting," he said, his voice completely empty of emotion. "Use the shell corporation we established for the Gangnam development. Request a compliance review with Seoul Heritage Restoration Partners regarding their data security protocols. Make it official. Make it unavoidable. You want to see her. I want to see them both." Min Seo hesitated. "Sir, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, then get me a DNA sample. Discreetly. I want confirmation before I make any moves. And if it confirms, then we'll discuss what comes next." Jae-kyung closed the folder with controlled precision. "Schedule the meeting for Friday afternoon. Late enough that most staff will be gone. I want minimal witnesses." After Min Seo left, Jae-kyung sat in the darkness of his office, staring at the photograph of a small boy with his eyes. A child who shouldn't exist. A child who, if the timeline and genetics confirmed what he already knew in his bones, meant that Zawadi hadn't betrayed him at all. She'd protected him. The question was, from what? Friday arrived wrapped in gray clouds and the promise of rain. Jae-kyung dressed with extra care, black suit, white shirt, no tie. He wanted to look professional, not threatening. Though he suspected that to Zawadi, he would always look threatening. That was simply what he was. The offices of Seoul Heritage Restoration Partners occupied the 8th floor of a renovated building in Jongno District. Tasteful. Historical. The kind of place that dealt in preserving the past while carefully ignoring the violent present. He arrived alone. No bodyguards. No entourage. Just him and a leather portfolio that contained exactly nothing important. The receptionist greeted him with practiced professionalism. "Mr. Kang from Daehan Consulting, correct? Ms. Weeksa is expecting you. Conference room B, just down the hall." But Jae-kyung didn't make it to the conference room. Because halfway down the hall, he heard a sound that stopped him cold, a child's voice, speaking in accented Korean. "No, that one doesn't fit. Try the other side." He turned his head slowly. Through the glass wall of a small meeting room, he saw him. Amari Seojun Bae sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by wooden building blocks. He was constructing something, a structure with careful, deliberate placement of each piece. His small hands moved with surprising precision for someone so young. Then the child looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, neither of them moved. The boy didn't smile, didn't look away. He simply studied Jae-kyung with an intensity that was deeply, disturbingly familiar. Jae-kyung had seen that expression in the mirror his entire life. "You're staring," the boy said finally, his voice matter of fact. Not afraid. Not friendly. Just observational. "I apologize," Jae-kyung heard himself say. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, uncertain in a way he hadn't felt in decades. "People always stare at my eyes," Amari continued, returning his attention to the blocks. "Ummi says I got them from my father. She says they're special." The word father hit like a physical blow. "Are they?" Jae-kyung asked, taking one step closer to the glass. Amari considered this seriously. "I don't know. They're just eyes. They see things. That's what eyes do." "What do you see?" The boy looked up again, and this time there was something assessing in his gaze, something that shouldn't exist in someone so small. "You're scared," he said simply. "But you're pretending not to be. Why do adults do that?" Before Jae-kyung could formulate a response, before he could even process the fact that a 3-year-old had just read him with surgical accuracy, a voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Amari, I told you to stay in." Zawadi appeared in the doorway and froze. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. She looked exactly as he remembered and completely different. Her hair was natural now, coiled and full, framing a face that had lost its softness and gained something harder. Her eyes, dark brown, intelligent, guarded, widened with recognition, and then something that might have been fear or fury or both. "Jae-kyung," she said, and her voice was steady despite everything. "Zawadi." Amari looked between them with open curiosity. "You know him, Ummi?" "Yes, baby. I know him." She didn't take her eyes off Jae-kyung. "Mr. Kong, I presume?" "That's not his name," Amari said, frowning. "Why did she call you that?" Out of the mouths of children, Jae-kyung thought distantly. "It's complicated. Adults always say that when they're lying," the boy observed. Zawadi moved quickly, placing herself between them, not protectively, but deliberately. Creating distance. "Amari, go to the other room." "Now." "But." "Now." The boy obeyed, but not before giving Jae-kyung one last long look. Then he gathered his blocks and left, closing the door behind him with surprising care. Silence filled the space between them. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," Zawadi said finally. The words landed with devastating simplicity. "Find out," Jae-kyung repeated. "So you're not denying it. Would you believe me if I did?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw no deception. Only exhaustion. "No," he admitted. "Those eyes don't lie." "No," she agreed quietly. "They don't. Why didn't you tell me?" Something flashed across her face, anger, finally breaking through. "Tell you? Tell you what exactly?" "Congratulations, you're going to be a father. I hope our child enjoys growing up as leverage in your empire." "Tell me, Jae-kyung, what kind of life would that have been?" "That wasn't your decision to make alone." "Yes, it was." She stepped forward, and he saw the steel in her spine. "It absolutely was." "You think I didn't know what would happen?" "The moment anyone in your world knew that child existed, he would stop being my son and become your asset. Your heir. Your weakness to be protected or exploited. I would not let him become a pawn in games he didn't choose to play. So you chose exile instead." "I chose safety. I chose normalcy. I chose a life where he could be a child instead of a symbol." Her voice cracked slightly. "I chose to let him be Amari instead of whatever you would have made him become." The truth of it cut deeper than any blade. Because she was right. If he'd known 3 years ago that she carried his child, he would have locked down her freedom in the name of protection. He would have surrounded her with guards, isolated her from danger, controlled every aspect of their lives. He would have destroyed her autonomy in order to preserve her safety. "I need to leave," he said abruptly. I can't." Jae-kyung. But he was already walking away, his carefully constructed control fracturing with each step. He made it to the elevator, to the street, to his car before the full weight of reality crushed down on him. He had a son. A son with his eyes, his mannerisms, his unsettling ability to see through people's facades. A son he'd never held, never protected, never known existed. A son who'd been raised in safety and peace precisely because Jae-kyung hadn't been part of his life. He sat in his car as rain began to fall, and for the first time since childhood, Jae-kyung Severin Bae didn't know what to do. That night, he ordered the DNA test anyway. Sent operatives to retrieve a drinking cup Amari had used at a cafe. By morning, the results confirmed what his eyes had already told him, 99.98% probability of paternity. The child was his. The question was, what now? He spent the weekend in his penthouse, ignoring calls from his associates, staring at the surveillance photos Min-SEO had compiled. Amari at the playground, climbing with fearless determination. Amari in a bookstore, studying picture books with intense concentration. Amari holding Zawadi's hand, looking up at her with complete trust. The boy was so small, so vulnerable. And yet something in his bearing reminded Jae-kyung of himself, that quality of watchfulness, of constant assessment. On Monday morning, Jae-kyung made a decision. He returned to Seoul Heritage Restoration Partners. Early this time. Before office hours. Zawadi was already there, working alone in the conference room, architectural plans spread across the table. She looked up when he entered, and this time there was no surprise. Only weariness. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do." She gestured to the chair across from her. "No theatrics this time. Just honesty. Can you manage that?" He sat, removed his jacket, folded his hands on the table, and realized with jarring recognition that Amari had made the same gesture when building with his blocks. "I had the DNA test done," he said. "Of course you did. I needed to be certain. And now you are." She met his eyes without flinching. "So, what do you want, Jae-kyung? Custody? Visitation? To claim him publicly and paint a target on his back? I want to understand why you came back to Seoul. If you were protecting him from me, why bring him here?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. "Because I'm good at my job, and this contract represents the culmination of my career. Because I thought 3 years was enough time for you to have forgotten about me. Because I was arrogant enough to believe we could slip in and out of Seoul without you ever knowing." She laughed bitterly. "I underestimated your surveillance capabilities. You underestimated how much I never stopped wondering where you went." The confession hung between them. "I didn't leave because I stopped," she cut herself off. "It doesn't matter what I felt. What matters is that I chose distance over danger. I chose his future over our past. And I'm saying you were right to make that choice." She blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I've spent 3 days thinking about what I would have done," he continued. "If you'd told me. And you're right. I would have tried to control everything. I would have suffocated you both in the name of protection." He leaned forward. "But that was before I saw him. Before I understood." "Understood what?" "That he's better off without me." Zawadi's expression shifted to something complicated. "Jae-kyung." "Look at him," Jae-kyung said, his voice rough. "He's curious, honest, unafraid. When he looked at me, he saw through everything I pretend to be, and he wasn't scared. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" He looked down at his hands. "My father started training me when I was 5, teaching me to recognize fear in men, to use it, to become it. I will not let Amari inherit that education." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to know him, not own him, not control him. Just know him. And I'm asking if that's possible." Zawadi studied him for a long moment, and he felt naked under that gaze. Finally, she spoke. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I was terrified. Not of being a mother. Of you finding out. Of what that would mean." She paused. "But I also grieved. Because despite everything, despite knowing what you are and what you do, I wanted you to meet him. I wanted him to know his father wasn't just a ghost." What changed? Reality. The moment he was born and I held him, I knew I'd made the right choice. Because in that moment, I loved him more than anything in the world, and you're not capable of that kind of love without conditions. The words stung because they were true. "You're right," he said simply. "I'm not. But I want to learn." "That's not how it works. You don't learn to love your child. It just happens. Then let it happen. Let me try." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand what you're asking. If you're in his life, even peripherally, you bring your world with you. Your enemies. Your violence. Your consequences. I know. Which is why I'm prepared to make changes." "What kind of changes?" "Whatever it takes." Before she could respond, the door opened and Amari walked in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He must have spent the night at the office. Zawadi had a small cot set up in the corner for late work nights. I'm hungry, he said, then stopped when he saw Jae-kyung. Oh, it's you again. Hello, Jae-kyung said, and his voice was gentler than Zawadi had ever heard it. Amari walked closer, studying him with that unnerving directness. Why do you keep coming here? I'm talking to your mother about important things. Are you going to make her sad? The question pierced straight through every defense Jae-kyung had ever built. I'm trying not to, he said honestly. Amari seemed to consider this. Then, without warning, he reached out and touched Jae-kyung's face, small fingers tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone, then coming to rest near his eye. Same, the boy said simply. Your eyes are the same as mine. Jae-kyung's breath caught. Up close, the resemblance was even more devastating. It wasn't just the eyes. It was the set of his jaw, the shape of his hands, the way he tilted his head when thinking. Yes, Jae-kyung managed. They are. Does that mean we're family? Zawadi made a small sound, but Jae-kyung kept his focus on the child. Would you like that? He asked. Amari thought about it with the seriousness of someone 3 times his age. I don't know you yet. Ami says you don't trust people until you know them. So I have to know you first. That's very wise. I am wise, Amari agreed without arrogance, just stating fact. Can you build with blocks? The question was so unexpected that Jae-kyung almost smiled. I haven't in a very long time. Then you should practice. Come on. Amari took his hand, small fingers wrapping around Jae-kyung's with complete trust that nearly broke him, and pulled him toward the corner where the blocks were kept. Zawadi watched, her expression unreadable, as Jae-kyung Severn-bae, one of the most feared strategists in Seoul's underground, sat cross-legged on the floor and let a 3-year-old teach him how to build towers. No, not like that, Amari said patiently. The heavy ones go on the bottom. Otherwise it falls. See? I see. You have to think about balance. Ami says everything needs balance. Jae-kyung glanced at Zawadi, who was watching them with something that might have been hope or fear or both. Your Ami is right, he said quietly. Balance is everything. They built in silence for several minutes, and Jae-kyung found himself oddly at peace. There was something meditative about the simple act of stacking blocks, of creating something instead of destroying it. Then Amari spoke again, his voice soft. Are you my father? The block in Jae-kyung's hand clattered to the floor. Zawadi moved forward quickly. Amari. It's okay, Jae-kyung said, holding up his hand. He looked at the boy, his son, and chose honesty. Yes, I am. Amari nodded slowly, processing this. Ami said my father was far away. That's why he couldn't be with us. That's true. But you're here now. Yes. Are you going to stay? And there it was. The question that mattered most, asked with childish directness that demanded truth. Jae-kyung looked at Zawadi, who stood frozen, waiting for his answer. I don't know, he said finally. That depends on a lot of things. But I want to. I want to try. Amari seemed satisfied with this. Okay, but you have to learn to build better. Your towers fall down too much. Despite everything, Jae-kyung felt his lips curve into something that might have been a smile. Then I'll practice. They spent another hour there, the 3 of them in that quiet room, and for the first time in years, Jae-kyung felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It felt almost like hope. But hope, he was about to learn, could be just as dangerous as fear. Because 2 days later, everything changed. Min Seo burst into Jae-kyung's office without knocking, his face pale. Sir, we have a problem. A significant problem. Jae-kyung looked up from the architectural drawings he'd been studying, plans for Cheongdeokgung Palace that Zawadi had shared with him. He'd been trying to understand her work, her passion. Trying to understand her. What kind of problem? Someone leaked photographs. A view with a child. Min Seo pulled up images on his tablet. These were taken 3 days ago. Outside Seoul Heritage Restoration Partners. They're circulating in certain channels. People are asking questions. The photographs showed Jae-kyung and Amari through the conference room glass, the moment they'd first made eye contact. Another showed Amari touching his face. A third captured them sitting together building blocks. And in every single image, their identical eyes were clearly visible. Who? Jae-kyung asked, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made men confess their sins. We're tracking the source, but preliminary intel suggests it came from Park Dong-min's network. He's been positioning against you since the restructuring last month. This gives him leverage. Jae-kyung's mind raced. Park Dong-min, a rival who'd been seeking weakness for years. And now he'd found it, not just any weakness, but one with a face and a name and the most distinctive eyes in Seoul. Lockdown protocol, Jae-kyung ordered. Full surveillance on Zawadi and Omari. No contact from anyone outside my approved list. And find out who took these photographs. I want to know everyone who touched these images. Sir, there's more. Min Seo hesitated. The images were accompanied by speculation about the child's mother. Ms. Weeks' name is being mentioned in certain circles. If Park connects her to the data breach from 3 years ago, he'll frame her as a spy who seduced me for access and produced a child as insurance. Jae-kyung stood abruptly, fury and fear warring in his chest. That's the narrative he'll build. What do you want to do? Get me Zawadi. Now. I don't care if you have to pull her out of a meeting. We need to move her and Omari immediately. She's not going to like that. I don't care what she likes. Her safety and his survival are all that matter now. 30 minutes later, Zawadi stormed into his office, and he could see the fury radiating off her in waves. You promised, she hissed. You promised changes. You promised to try. And now there are photographs everywhere, Jae-kyung. Photographs of you with him. People know. I didn't leak them. But they exist because of you. Because you couldn't stay away. She paced like a caged animal. Do you understand what you've done? Omari is visible enough already. Brown skin, Korean name, and those damn eyes. He already stands out everywhere we go. And now you've made him a target. Which is why I'm moving you both to a secure location until... No. She cut him off with savage finality. Absolutely not. Zawadi, this isn't negotiable. Everything is negotiable. You don't get to make decisions about our safety just because your world is dangerous. My world. He stepped closer, and she didn't back away. You're in Seoul. Your son has my eyes and my surname. Whether you like it or not, my world is already yours. Because you brought it to us. The accusation rang between them. We were fine. We were safe. And you couldn't just let it be. You came back here. You brought him into range. I didn't think. She stopped, her hands shaking. I thought I was being careful enough. Careful doesn't exist in my world. There's only controlled or chaotic. And right now, everything is sliding toward chaos. She sank into a chair, all the fight draining out of her. What do you want me to do? Let me protect you. Both of you. Just until I can contain this situation. And if you can't contain it? He didn't answer because they both knew the truth. Some things, once unleashed, couldn't be put back in the box. Where is Omari now? He asked. At the apartment with my colleague. He's supposed to fly back to Nairobi tomorrow with my mother. I was sending him away early because her voice broke. Because I felt something was wrong. Mother's intuition, maybe. Or just paranoia. It wasn't paranoia. It was good instinct. Jae-kyung pulled out his phone. Min Seo will arrange secure transport to the airport. Private terminal. Your mother and Omari will leave tonight instead of tomorrow. And me? You stay. We need to present a united front. If you run, it looks like guilt. United front, she repeated bitterly. We're not united. We're barely civil. Then we pretend. Because if Park thinks he can use you to destroy me, or me to destroy you, we're both finished. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. When I left 3 years ago, I told myself I was protecting Omari from your world. But maybe I was protecting him from you. From the man who solves every problem with control and force. And now? Now I'm wondering if I protected him from the wrong thing. Because the world found us anyway. And the man sitting across from me looks more afraid than I've ever seen him. I am afraid, he admitted. Terrified, actually. Because I know what men like Park are capable of. And I know that child is the most valuable leverage anyone could have against me. So what do? We do what I should have done 3 years ago when the data breach happened. We find the real threat and eliminate it. Zawadi's eyes widened. You're talking about? I'm talking about neutralizing Park before he can weaponize your son against both of us. Jae-kyung leaned forward. I won't kill him if that's what you're worried about. But I will make it impossible for him to act against us. How? By doing what I do best. Seeing the board 3 moves ahead and removing pieces before they become problems. She studied him, and he could see her weighing options she never wanted to consider. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but I have conditions. Name them. Amari doesn't know any of this. Whatever you do, however you handle Park, my son remains innocent of the details. He gets on that plane tonight thinking it's just an early trip home. Agreed. And when this is over, when you've neutralized the threat, you don't get to decide what happens next. We sit down, the two of us, and we figure out what it means for you to be in his life. Real boundaries. Real agreements. None of this unilateral decision-making. Also agreed. Finally, she said, and her voice softened slightly, you stop looking at him like he's your redemption. Amari is a child. Not your second chance. Not your legacy. Not your do-over. He's just a 3-year-old boy who deserves to be loved without conditions. The words hit like arrows, each one precise and true. What if I don't know how to do that? He asked quietly. Then you learn. Or you step back. She stood. Those are your options. There's no third path where you get to reshape him into whatever you think you should have been. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Minasio's message was brief and chilling, situation escalating. Park made contact. Wants meeting. Jaekyung showed Zawadi the message. What does it mean? She asked. It means he's ready to make his move. Which means we make ours first. The meeting happened that night in a neutral location, a high-end restaurant that catered to the kind of clientele that didn't ask questions about private dining rooms or security protocols. Park Dong-min arrived with 2 bodyguards. Jaekyung came alone, though Minaseo waited outside with a contingency team. Blue Viper, Park said, using the nickname Jaekyung had never liked. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Let's skip the pleasantries. You leaked those photographs. What do you want? Park smiled, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man holding winning cards. Direct as always. Very well. I want the Eastern distribution networks. The ones you've been hoarding since the merger. In exchange for what? Not spreading rumors about a child. In exchange for not pursuing the very interesting connection between that child's mother and the data breach 3 years ago. Park pulled out his own tablet, displaying documents. Ms. Zawadi Wiksa, project manager during the breach. Left abruptly afterward. Then reappears 3 years later with a son who looks remarkably like you. The narrative practically writes itself. She had nothing to do with the breach. Perhaps. But can you prove that to everyone who matters? Can you prove she wasn't working with someone? Can you prove the child wasn't always meant to be leverage? Park leaned forward. The beauty of a good frame is that it doesn't need to be true. It just needs to be believable. Jaekyung kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. Park had done his homework. Had connected dots that even Jaekyung had only recently verified. You've made a mistake, Jaekyung said softly. Have I? Yes. You assumed the child was my weakness. But you didn't consider what making him visible would do to your own position. Park's smile faltered slightly. I don't follow. The moment those photographs circulated, every person in our network saw them. Saw those eyes. Saw the resemblance. Jaekyung pulled out his own phone, displaying a series of messages. Within hours, I received 17 offers of protection. 9 propositions for alliances specifically to secure Meyer. For attempts to broker marriage arrangements for when he comes of age. You're bluffing. Am I? You wanted to make him a weakness. Instead, you made him a symbol. A next generation. People who've been uncertain about my long-term stability now see succession. Continuity. Future. He pocketed his phone. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed, public confirmation that my bloodline continues. Park's face had gone pale. You're insane if you think. I think you misread the situation. You saw vulnerability where there was actually potential. Jaekyung stood. As for the Eastern networks, you'll never have them. And as for Ms. Wiksa, if you pursue any narrative involving her, I'll make sure everyone knows about your arrangements with the Busan operations. The ones that violate about 17 different territorial agreements. You have no proof of. I have enough proof to start conversations you don't want started. Just like you had enough photographs to start rumors. He buttoned his jacket with precise movements. The difference is, my proof destroys actual operations. Yours just made my position stronger. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. If anyone approaches that child or his mother with anything less than absolute respect, I'll consider it a direct attack on me personally. And we both know how I respond to direct attacks. He left Park sitting in stunned silence. Outside, Minacio fell into step beside him. Did it work? We'll know in the next 24 hours. Either he backs down or we move to phase 2. Which is releasing evidence that Park has been skimming from shared operations for the past 2 years. It won't destroy him, but it'll damage his credibility enough that no one will take his accusations seriously. That's playing with fire, sir. Everything I do plays with fire. Jake Young climbed into his car. How's the transport situation? The boy and his grandmother are at the private terminal now. Flight leaves in 40 minutes. Ms. Weeksa is with them. Something twisted in Jake Young's chest. I need to be there. Sir, is that wise? More photographs could. I don't care. Take me there now. 20 minutes later, Jake Young walked into the private terminal and found Zawadi sitting with Amari and an older woman he assumed was her mother. The resemblance was clear, same elegant bone structure, same careful posture. Amari saw him first. You came. The simple delight in the boy's voice nearly undid him. I wanted to say goodbye, Jake Young said, kneeling to the child's level. I heard you're going home. Bibi is taking me back to Nairobi. Ami has to stay for work. Amari looked between them with those two knowing eyes. But she's sad about it. She doesn't want me to go without her. I'm fine, baby, Zawadi said, but her voice was thick. Jake Young met her gaze over Amari's head and saw the fear there. She was sending her child away to keep him safe, and it was destroying her. Amari, he said carefully, would you let me give you something before you go? What is it? Jake Young removed a thin silver bracelet from his wrist, something he'd worn for years, a gift from his own mother before she died. He'd never taken it off. This belonged to someone very important to me. I'd like you to have it. To keep you safe while you're away. Amari held out his small wrist solemnly, and Jake Young clasped the bracelet around it. It was far too large, but the boy touched it with reverent fingers. It's pretty, he said. Thank you. You're welcome. Then Amari did something unexpected. He wrapped his arms around Jake Young's neck in a fierce hug. Don't make Ami sad while I'm gone, he whispered. Promise. Jake Young's arms came up automatically, holding this small person who somehow carried half his genetic code. I promise to try. Trying is good, Amari said, pulling back. Ami says trying is how we get better at hard things. Your Ami is very wise. Zawadi's mother stood, her expression carefully neutral. We should board. The flight won't wait forever. Amari hugged Zawadi for a long time, and Jake Young watched her memorize the feel of her son in her arms. When they finally separated, her eyes were wet. Be good for Bibi, she told him. I'll call you every day. Every day, Amari agreed. Then he looked at Jake Young one more time. Will you be here when I come back? The question hung in the air, weighted with more meaning than a 3-year-old could possibly understand. I hope so, Jake Young said honestly. Me too, Amari said. Then he took his grandmother's hand and walked toward the gate, the silver bracelet catching the light with each step. When they were gone, Zawadi finally let herself break. Silent tears tracked down her face as she stared at the empty doorway. He'll be safe, Jake Young said quietly. I have people watching the flight. Another team in Nairobi. Nothing will happen to him. I know, but that doesn't make this easier. She wiped her eyes roughly. I've never been away from him this long. The longest was 3 days when I had that conference in Mombasa. This could be weeks. Then we make it days. We resolve the park situation, clear your name definitively, and get you back to Nairobi as quickly as possible. She looked at him then, really looked at him. You gave him your mother's bracelet. You noticed. I notice everything about you. I always have. She turned away. That's been my problem from the beginning. They stood in silence for a moment, two people bound by blood and circumstance and something neither wanted to name. I need to ask you something, Zawadi said finally. And I need you to answer honestly. All right. When you look at him, what do you see? Jake Young considered the question carefully. I see someone who deserves better than what I am. Someone who's already wiser than I was at 3 times his age. Someone who he stopped, struggling for words. I see a chance to break a cycle. To end something that should have ended generations ago. What cycle? Violence as inheritance. Fear as legacy. The belief that power comes from how much damage you can inflict. He looked at his hands. My father taught me that the world is predator and prey. That mercy is weakness. That love is leverage. And I believed him. Built everything on those principles. And now? Now I've met someone who looked at me with my own eyes and asked why adults pretend not to be scared. Someone who expects honesty without understanding how rare that is. Someone who his voice roughened. Someone who hugged me like I was worth loving, even though he doesn't know what I've done. What I am. Zawadi was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. He sees the person you could be, not the person you are. Which is exactly why I shouldn't be in his life. Eventually, he'll learn the truth. And when he does, then let him learn it from you. Let him hear your story in your words. Let him decide for himself what it means. She stepped closer. You asked me what I saw when I looked at you 3 years ago. You want to know why I left without explanation? Yes, because I was falling in love with someone who terrified me. Because every time you touched me gently, I remembered what those hands had done. Because I could see both versions of you, the man who brought me tea when I worked late and the man whose name made people whisper in fear. And I didn't know which one was real. The confession hung between them like a living thing. They're both real, he said. I'm both of those people. I know that now. I think I knew it then too. But I couldn't reconcile it. Couldn't figure out how to love someone who contained that much contradiction. She touched his face gently, the way Amari had. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I had to choose. So I chose the version of you that would keep him safe, the one that didn't exist. The distant father. The absent protector. And now? Now I'm choosing the version that's standing in front of me. The one who's afraid. The one who doesn't have all the answers. The one who gave his mother's bracelet to a child he barely knows because he wants to keep him safe. Her hand dropped. That's the father Amari deserves. Not the perfect one. Not the harmless one. The one who's trying. Before Jae-kyung could respond, Min-seo appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. Sir, we have a situation. Park made his move earlier than expected. He's released documents claiming Ms. Weeksa was compromised during the original breach. It's spreading through official channels now. Zawadi went pale. What kind of documents? Fabricated communications. Made to look like you were corresponding with outside entities during your time in Seoul. Timestamps match the breach period. Min-seo looked apologetic. It's sophisticated work. Will take time to debunk. Time we don't have, Jae-kyung said grimly. If this gains traction, Zawadi won't be able to leave Korea. They'll detain her for questioning at minimum. Then we need to move now, Zawadi said, her voice steadying with purpose. What's the play? Jae-kyung looked at her with something like admiration. You're not panicking. I've spent 3 years preparing for worst-case scenarios. This is bad, but it's not worst case. She straightened her shoulders. So what do? We go on offense. Min-seo, release the Park files. All of them. Financial irregularities, territorial violations, the works. That will start a war, sir. Good. Let him fight on multiple fronts while we dismantle his accusations systematically. Jae-kyung turned to Zawadi. I need you to contact everyone you worked with 3 years ago. Anyone who can verify your whereabouts, your work patterns, your access logs. We're building an airtight timeline that proves you were nowhere near the compromised systems. That will take days. Then we work in shifts. No sleep until it's done. He pulled out his phone, already making calls. Min-seo, get our legal team involved. I want them reviewing every document Park released. Find the inconsistencies. Find the proof of fabrication. Over the next 72 hours, Jae-kyung's penthouse became a war room. Zawadi sat at one end of the massive dining table, surrounded by old project files, timesheets, and communication logs. She made call after call to former colleagues, reconstruction supervisors, even the coffee shop owner near her old office who remembered her regular orders and schedule. Jae-kyung worked the other end, coordinating with his information network, pressuring contacts in law enforcement, and systematically destroying Park's credibility one leaked document at a time. Min-seo coordinated between them, managing the flow of information and ensuring nothing fell through the cracks. On the second night, Zawadi fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on a stack of architectural plans. Jae-kyung found her there at 3 a.m. and carefully draped his jacket over her shoulders. She stirred slightly. What time is it? Late. You should rest properly. Can't. Need to finish verifying the Jaengbakgung timeline. But her eyes were already closing again. Jae-kyung sat beside her, reviewing her notes by lamplight. Her handwriting was precise, methodical. She documented everything, not just her work 3 years ago, but also contingency plans for Amari if things went wrong now. Emergency contacts in Nairobi. Her mother's medical information. Instructions for Amari's care. She'd been preparing to lose, he realized. Preparing for the possibility that she might be detained, imprisoned, separated from her son indefinitely. And still she'd come back to Seoul. Still she'd taken the risk because the work mattered to her. He understood that kind of dedication. It was the same force that had driven him to build his empire, the need to create something that outlasted violence and fear. On the 3rd day, they caught their break. "Sir," Minesio said, bursting into the penthouse with barely contained excitement. "We found it. The fabricated documents Park released, they contain metadata that proves they were created last week, not 3 years ago. Whoever did the forgery got sloppy with the digital signatures." Zawadi sat up straight. "That proves they're fake. Better than that. It proves deliberate fraud. We can trace the creation back to a specific computer. One that's registered to Park's organization." Minesio grinned. He didn't just make false accusations. He created forged evidence. That's criminal. Jae-kyung felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. "Get this to our legal contacts. File formal charges. Make sure it goes through proper channels. I want this official and public." "What about the rest of the timeline verification?" Zawadi asked. "Still valuable as defense, but now we don't need it as our primary strategy. We're not just proving you're innocent. We're proving Park is guilty of fraud and defamation." Jae-kyung looked at Minesio. "How long until this becomes public knowledge? I can have it in the right hands within the hour. Official charges filed by end of day." "Do it." As Minesio left to execute the plan, Zawadi sagged back in her chair. "Is it really over?" "Not quite. There will be fallout. Park won't go quietly. But the immediate threat to you is neutralized." Jae-kyung stood, stretching muscles that had been tense for days. "You can go home. Back to Nairobi. Back to Amari." Something complicated crossed her face. "And what happens after that?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've spent 3 days working together. Fighting together. And now it's done, and I'm supposed to just go back to my life." She stood, facing him across the table. "What happens to us, Jae-kyung? What happens with Amari?" "That depends on what you want. I want my son to know his father. Not the legend. Not the strategist. The man who stayed up for 72 hours straight to protect people he barely knows." She moved around the table toward him. "The man who gave away his mother's bracelet because it was the only thing he had that meant protection and love." "I'm not a good man, Zawadi. I'm not asking for a good man. I'm asking for an honest one. One who shows up. One who tries." She stopped directly in front of him. "Can you be that?" He thought about Amari's question at the airport. "Will you be here when I come back?" He thought about his promise. "I hope so." Hope. Such a dangerous, fragile thing. "I want to be," he said finally. "But I don't know if that's enough. My world is still violent. My enemies are still real. Being connected to me will always mean danger. Being alive means danger. Being visible means risk. We don't get to eliminate all of it." She reached out, taking his hands. "But we can choose what we're willing to risk it for." "And you're willing to risk it? For what? Irregular visits? Awkward video calls? A father who shows up once a year with expensive gifts and no real understanding of his son's life." "No," she said firmly. "I'm willing to risk it for more than that. For real involvement. For you to know him and let him know you. For messy, complicated, imperfect family dynamics that don't fit any traditional structure but work because we make them work. You're asking me to dismantle parts of my empire. To step back from operations that keep my position secure. To make myself vulnerable. I'm asking you to choose what kind of legacy you want to leave. Power? Or family? Fear? Or love?" Her grip tightened. "You told me you wanted to break a cycle. This is how you do it. Not by being perfect. By being present." He looked at their joined hands, her brown skin against his pale, and thought about Amari, who carried both of them in his features. A living bridge between worlds that should never have intersected. If I do this, if I restructure my operations, step back from certain activities, make space for being something other than Blue Viper, some of my people will see it as weakness. Then let them. You'll find out who's actually loyal versus who just fears you. I could lose significant power. Or you could gain something more valuable. She smiled sadly. You're so used to calculating moves 3 steps ahead. But this isn't chess, Jae-kyung. It's life. Sometimes you just have to make the choice and see what happens. He thought about Amari's observation. You're scared, but you're pretending not to be. Why do adults do that? I'm terrified, he admitted. Of failing him. Of failing you. Of being exactly what my father was, a man who loved in the only way he knew how, which meant controlling everything and trusting nothing. Then be different. Be better. Not perfect. Just better. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from Min SEO. Charges filed. Park's organization in full damage control. You won. He showed Zawadi the message. So it's done, she said. This part is done. But you're right, the bigger question remains. He set down the phone. I'm going to do it. Restructure. Step back from certain operations. Make space for he struggled for the word. For being someone Amari can know without having to unlearn everything he learns. That's all I ask. There's one condition. What? You don't hide him anymore. Don't hide our connection. If I'm going to be in his life, I want it known that he's mine. Not as leverage. Not as asset. As family. He pulled her closer. I want him to grow up knowing that his father chose him. Chose you. Chose this. Even knowing the cost. Tears gathered in her eyes. He'll have questions. About what you do. About your past. Then I'll answer them honestly. Age appropriately, but honestly. No lies. No sanitized versions. Just truth. He touched her face gently. And maybe, over time, he'll help me figure out how to be someone worthy of those questions. She kissed him then, brief, fierce, full of promise and fear and hope all tangled together. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through tears. I need to book a flight. I need to see my son. Already done. Private jet. Leaves in 4 hours. I'm coming with you. To Nairobi? If you'll allow it. I think it's time I met your mother properly. And told Amari in person that I'm going to try very hard to be the kind of father he deserves. She'll interrogate you mercilessly. Ask all the questions I've been too polite or too scared to ask. Good. Someone should. He smiled a real smile, small and uncertain but genuine. I've faced down crime lords and corrupt officials. I think I can handle one protective grandmother. You have no idea what you're in for. Then I'll learn. That seems to be the theme lately. For hours later, they were in the air, flying toward Nairobi and whatever came next. Jae-kyung stared out the window at clouds that looked like mountains in the moonlight and thought about the conversation that awaited him. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that his father orchestrates criminal enterprises but wants desperately to be a good person? How do you earn trust you haven't deserved? How do you build a relationship on a foundation of absence? He didn't have answers. But for the first time in his life, Jae-kyung Severin Bey was willing to admit he didn't need to have all the answers before taking the first step. When they landed in Nairobi, dawn was breaking over the city in shades of gold and amber. Zawadi's mother met them at the private terminal, Amari sleeping against her shoulder. The older woman looked Jae-kyung up and down with an expression that could have carved stone. So you're the one. Yes, ma'am. You have his eyes, she observed, then looked at her daughter. Are you sure about this? No, Zawadi admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. That's either very brave or very foolish. Time will tell which. She shifted Amari slightly. He's been asking about you. About his father with the same eyes. I told him you'd explain when he was older. But he doesn't like waiting. Then I won't make him wait. Jae-kyung stepped closer, looking at the sleeping child. The silver bracelet gleamed on his small wrist. May I? After a moment's hesitation, Zawadi's mother transferred Amari into his arms. The weight of him was startling, substantial, and fragile all at once. He stirred slightly, those blue eyes opening halfway. You came back, Amari mumbled sleepily. I promised I'd try. Did you make me happy? I'm working on it. Good. The boy settled against his chest with complete trust. Stay this time. It wasn't a question. It was a command delivered with the certainty of someone too young to understand impossibility. I'll stay, Jae-kyung said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. They drove through Nairobi as the city woke up around them, and Jae-kyung held his son and watched the world he'd never expected to be part of unfold through the windows. Over the next few days, he met Zawadi's extended family, endured interrogations from cousins and aunts who wanted to know his intentions, sat through meals where he was simultaneously guest of honor and suspect under investigation. He played blocks with Amari and learned that the boy was fiercely competitive about tower height. He read stories in accented English and discovered that Amari corrected his pronunciation without mercy. He watched Zawadi with her family and understood that this was what he'd cost her 3 years ago, this warmth, this belonging, this uncomplicated love. One evening, Amari climbed into his lap unprompted. "Are you staying forever?" "Not forever. I have work in Seoul, but I'll come back. As often as I can. Promise?" "I promise." Adults break promises sometimes, Amari observed with disturbing wisdom. Ami says they don't mean to, but they do. You're right. Sometimes adults break promises. But I'm going to try very hard not to break this one. He looked down at the boy. "Do you know what I do?" "For work." Ami says you're a strategist. That means you help people solve problems. It was technically true if you didn't examine the nature of the problems too closely. "That's one way to describe it," Jae-kyung said carefully. "But when you're older, I'll tell you the whole truth about what I do and how I do it. And then you can decide if you want me in your life." "Why would I not want you?" "Because the truth is complicated and not always good." Amari thought about this seriously. Ami says good people can do bad things, and bad people can do good things. She says that's what makes people confusing. Your Ami is very wise. I know. He leaned back against Jae-kyung's chest. I like having a father. It makes me less different at school. Everyone else has one. The simple statement broke something in Jae-kyung's chest. I like having a son, he said quietly. Even though I'm just learning how. That's okay. I'm just learning how to be a good son, too. We can learn together. Out of the mouths of children, Jae-kyung thought. Perfect wisdom delivered without pretension. 2 weeks later, Jae-kyung returned to Seoul alone. But he left part of himself in Nairobi, in video calls with Amari every evening, in the trust fund he'd established under Kenyan law, in the promise he'd made to return within a month. He restructured his operations systematically, sold off interests in the violent enterprises, distributed power among lieutenants he trusted, made himself less central, less indispensable, less feared. Some allies defected. Some enemies grew bolder. His net worth decreased by millions. He accepted all of it. Because 3,000 miles away, a small boy with blue eyes was learning that his father kept promises. And that was worth more than any empire. Zawadi returned to Seoul 6 weeks later, and this time she didn't hide. She brought Amari to meetings, introduced Jae-kyung to colleagues as Amari's father, stopped pretending they were unconnected. People stared at them, the Korean strategist, the Kenyan preservationist, and the child who belonged to both worlds, but Zawadi met their stares with calm dignity. Let them look, she told Jae-kyung. Let them see that family doesn't fit in neat boxes. And so they did. 3 years later, Jae-kyung stood in a Nairobi schoolyard, watching Amari play with other 6-year-olds. The boy had grown taller, more confident. He still had those striking blue eyes, but they no longer made him self-conscious. If anything, he wore them as a badge of uniqueness. He's doing well, Zawadi said, appearing beside him. They stood together often now, not romantically, but as partners in the complicated business of raising a child across continents and cultures. He is, Jae-kyung agreed. He asked me yesterday what I did before I became a strategist. What did you tell him? The truth. Simplified for his age, but the truth. That I made choices I'm not proud of. That I hurt people. That I'm trying to be better now. How did he respond? He asked if I was like a villain trying to become a hero. Jae-kyung smiled slightly. I told him I was more like a person who'd been lost and was trying to find his way home. And am I home? Zawadi asked softly. You and him. Yes. Complicated, imperfect, across multiple time zones home. But home nonetheless. She leaned against his shoulder. I never thought this would work. Neither did I. But apparently, we're both capable of being wrong. Amari ran toward them then, excited about something his friend had said. He grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the playground equipment, chattering in a mix of English, Swahili, and Korean. Jae-kyung let himself be pulled along, this man who'd once controlled empires with fear, now being led by a 6-year-old with boundless energy and his father's eyes. They said the most dangerous men were the ones who could smile while destroying you. But Jae-kyung had learned something more important. The strongest men were the ones who could admit they didn't have all the answers and choose love anyway. Not perfect love. Not uncomplicated love. But present, persistent, trying everyday love. The inheritance he would leave Amari wasn't power or wealth or fear. It was the knowledge that redemption was possible. That cycles could be broken. That choosing vulnerability over control was the bravest thing a man could do. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As the sun set over Nairobi, painting the sky in impossible colors, Jae-kyung Severin Bey held his son's hand and understood that he'd finally found something worth more than any empire he'd ever built. He'd found family. Messy, complicated, imperfect family. And it was everything. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what moment resonated most. Subscribe for more stories that explore the complicated truths about power, family, and what it really means to change. Because every ending is really just a beginning, and we're just getting started. ****